I'm no expert on Chinese history, but I don't think Chinese emperors ever burnt his subjects at the stake for not following his religion. They would have to accept certain national rituals, of course, but then it would become part of the religion. But nobody was actually asked if they believed, in the afterlife, in the Trinity and, that sort of nonsense. So as long as you showed outward respect and compliance with whatever the emperor wanted, you would be okay. You'd be left alone. You wouldn't be burnt at the stake for being the wrong kind of Christian. Now, I have a peculiar problem with Chinese people who are Christians because their ancestors did not have to go through the horror of being burned at the stake for very for offences that we would consider very minor, such as not acknowledging the divinity of Jesus and saying that God is one. So why then would Chinese people convert to Christianity? Why would they worship a Jew? And I do know a few reasons. I mean, I think most people are deracinated in the sense that they're not in connection with their roots or their ancestry, and they do not even understand their own history. And most Chinese people are not, or many Chinese people are not in the continent of their ancestors. And so you would expect them to, have absorbed a few influences over the centuries. So why did so many Chinese people find Christianity so attractive? I don't know if you've ever watched a film with it's called the Life of Susie Wong, and is that the one? Anyway, it's about English missionaries who go to China and convert a whole bunch of Chinese people, and they converted the Chinese by telling them stories that they wanted to believe were true, about the divinity of Jesus. And of course, in this movie that I seem to remember, they were very charming and nice and protective and supportive of these Chinese people, and there were quite a lot of missionaries there. So what about Christianity attracted these Chinese people? And I'm saying, in a way, even though the emperors, the Chinese emperors, did not force Chinese people to believe in nonsense, unlike the ancestors of the Europeans, their religion, which I think preceded even Confucius, who was born before Jesus, by about 500 years, I think. The belief was that there are only two kinds of afterlife, and your status can lower in the afterlife even after you're dead, and your status will lower when you have no male descendants to perform the rites of tomb sweeping in the spring. And so this idea would spread that the moment you run out of male descendants, you become a hungry ghost, and you therefore have to make a point of making sure that you have more than just an heir, just not a spare, only one spare as your heir. You would need, lots of sons, so they too would have lots of sons, giving you lots of grandsons to perform your tomb sweeping rites every year. And if they didn't, if your male line went out, then you would become a hungry ghost, and it wouldn't help if only female descendants did it, because it didn't count, right? So that was a belief system that, well, maybe they didn't literally believe in it, but you don't really have to believe in it for somebody to use it against you if, you weren't married, if you only had daughters, if all your sons died. People would look at you and think, well, the moment you die, you become a hungry ghost. There wouldn't even be this sort of grace period of, a few decades while your son survived you in death. You would immediately become a hungry ghost, and poor you, and they could show that they know by referring to it. So it shouldn't be a surprise, I suppose, that a lot of Chinese people were easily converted by these Christian missionaries, because their afterlife was so gloomy. Imagine, we lose status all the time, as during our lifetime. To lose status after we are dead is probably not a nice thought. So they chose to think that if they were Christian, they might be singing about the glory of God on his right hand, or whatever it is the form of words in the New Testament. So that, I think, is why so many Chinese people convert to Christianity. And of course, there's also the additional reason for just copycatting the Western imperialists, because, well, they're so powerful and they must be doing something right. And their religion was Christianity, so go and copycat it. But I fear that it actually makes people stupid. I mean, I've observed the TLC, and it makes them neurotic. And what causes neurosis? I was accused of neurosis by Scott, but I think he's just projecting. I don't think I'm doing anything that is illogical, and I don't think I'm saying anything untrue or immoral. So I think he is projecting. And I think he projects because he doesn't quite say what he means. In matters of politics, of course. In matters of politics. Because A, it's contentious, and B, his wife probably wouldn't approve or agree. And this, I think, stops most husbands from going there. And I knew this when I spoke to a political activist, a male political activist of the old school, and he did, honestly say to me that he wouldn't be doing it if his wife didn't approve. And I never forgot that. And actually, Cicero did write a book of advice about those who want to participate in politics. And he did say, well, if you do want a life in politics, make sure your wife agrees and is supportive, because you would never hear the end of it if she didn't. She wouldn't support you and she would undermine you, and life would be horrible. Well, domestic life would be horrible. And this was in a time when, well, I guess Roman patriarchs were supposed to have so much power. But that was what Cicero said, and I guess he knew a thing or two. But I acknowledge that a lot of our sacred beliefs are beliefs that we do not know to be true. We only wish it were true, and we wish it with all our heart and soul. And when people wish for something with all their heart and soul, it's very difficult to disabuse them of their wrong think. And there's so many varieties of wrong think. But I think if we're going to be logical, and I think having this idea of a supreme authority of the universe, who is omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly moral, and is only one and not three, you can understand that, Hindus and Buddhists, they don't know this, but really, they are worshipping the Abrahamic God. But their way to him is not the easiest route, because A, that they don't even hope for heaven, and we're not really sure if nirvana is a permanent state or just a light bulb moment that will in time fade into ignorance and confusion again. It's not actually specified, and we don't really know. After all, Europeans thought that they were enlightened, and they slid into liberalism. And of course, it's not enough just to think that you're scientific and logical, because that won't get you to heaven, and that won't restrict your scope of action enough to keep you out of trouble. So we should really see religion as this. You may be correctly assessing reality, you may be making sound arguments, but even so, you could be immoral. For example, if I were a criminal and I see you have something I want, I could take it from you, and I suppose it would be logical for me to kill you to stop you complaining about it if I thought nobody would catch me. So I might do those things to you, unless that I had some idea that stealing and murder is against the law, and I shouldn't do it anyway, because God, in his omniscience, would know what I've done, and in the afterlife I would be expected to pay for my crimes. So what we need is not to believe in falsehoods and not to be illogical, but also not to be immoral. And then if all three are ticked, if all three boxes are ticked, then we should be all right. But these Christians, are they really sure? Well, of course, nobody's really sure, but do they think do they really think that it's not idolatry to worship a man? And if they don't, do they not doubt, and do they not fear for the repose of their immortal souls? And if they don't, then it must mean they are atheists and they don't take the whole idea of God and the afterlife seriously, and they're just, pretending to believe, as perhaps are the Jews, because the whole point of believing in the afterlife is to postpone pleasure. So we think, well, we're going to enjoy eternal bliss if we get to heaven, and this makes them better able to say no to all the things that would amount to mortal sins. So that way of thinking would help protect them from, falling into sin and living a life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and not doing the good parenting thing. But Jews would have to worry about whether they would actually get to heaven, and whether Jews would be punished in a different way. And this talk, I know Rabbi Mizrahi has said with a certain amount of confidence and clarity that there would be a division between Jewish heaven and Gentile heaven. But if there is an afterlife for Jews, it would be mostly, a kind of torture and execution chamber, after which, the dead Jew would be, put somewhere, and then they are resurrected, and their punishment resumes until they are until they're all discharged. And I suppose then God might ask, well, all your sins have been discharged. You haven't had much fun, have you? Well, you're allowed to have another go at life. Would you like another go to see if you can get to heaven this time? Would you like to choose the religion of your parents? And I'll send you to the appropriate womb, so that when you're born, you will be born of, parents of the religion of your choice. Now, which one would you choose, Jew? And, they might be stupid enough to choose Jew again, Judaism again, or they might be foolish enough to choose Christianity. I mean, I don't think they choose Hinduism or Buddhism because, well, if the idea is to get to heaven, you wouldn't choose Hinduism or Buddhism because it only offers reincarnation, not heaven after death. So I think as I talk to myself about these matters, it's becoming increasingly clear the kind of afterlife we would be expected to have, and I suppose I will need to write in more detail about it, though I have already written about it and posted more than one post about the subject, and I hope you will go to my Substack to have a look and maybe comment.